titled The Concept of Progress. This is a program put on by the Theta, Iota, Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated right here in Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm Brother Marcus McCullough, the chair of this program, and we are grateful that you are with us this evening. Tell somebody about this. Put it on social media. Put it on your Facebook. Tell somebody, hey, the Alphas have a wonderful event going on. Please, please, please spread the word. We have this event every year, and it's wonderful, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what it is a little bit later. Before I invite our President Lightfoot to speak with us and give his greetings, we also want you to know that the Springfield Alphas do a number of wonderful things in our community, including supporting young people who are on their way to college, pursuing their educational endeavors. If you would like to join us in that work, particularly financially supporting our work, we invite you to consider, even now, possibly making a donation to the Levy Rebel Scholarship and Mentorship Foundation, the scholarship and mentorship arm of our chapter, where we do wonderful work in the community, particularly assisting young men getting ready for college. So think about that as you enjoy this wonderful event. And again, we're grateful that you're with us today. I'll toss it over to Brother James Lightfoot III, our president of Theta Iota Lambda, who will extend his greetings at this time.
Thank you, Brother McCullough. Thank you. Good evening and welcome. This is the Theta Iota Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity. And as Brother McCullough introduced, our Concept of Progress program. Thank you for joining us. This is a very important conversation that we are about to enter. And we will share what's been defined as a changing of the guard for our nation's government and a call to action for the Black, Brown, and our allied communities. Tonight, we welcome a very dear brother to us, Brother Art Gordon. He will share with us his concept of progress as it relates from movement to mobilization, keeping the momentum. As we will look to be, as we are all recovering and still grappling with and preparing for what has occurred in this year's past election, we need to remember that though those results may not have been in our interests or in the interests of many who gathered, the work must continue. We all need progress. We still need your strategies to strategize, your organization to organize, and your advocacy so we can advocate for the needs of our community. Lastly, let our efforts moving forward be for progress, not just for nice sound bites. Brother McCullough, I'd like to welcome you back as we introduce our speaker for this evening.
Excellent. Thank you, Brother President. We certainly appreciate your words of greeting, and really we echo everything that you have said. So what is a concept of progress? Well, it comes from our history book, The History of Alpha. I've got a blurred background. The History of Alpha Phi Alpha, a Development in College Life, chapter 15. The title of the chapter is The Concept of Progress. And as we have this event every year, I think it is valuable and important to read the opening paragraph of this chapter, as it allows us to understand what we mean by a concept of progress and how we came to this point. So join me in just a moment for a little bit of important historical reading. With the dawn of the mid-century, there was the realization that the fraternity could move with progressive influence and action into the areas of education, citizenship, and public service, with more complete organization and concentrated efforts by the general organization, the delegates of chapters, and the individual brothers. The concept of progress had been characteristic not only of the fraternity, but also of 20th century America, for it was descriptive of the development and expansion of the nation and of the onward march of the Black people from slavery and oppression to freedom. There was a fundamental belief that one of the evidences of life was progress. Such progress was not of the continuous type, which seemed to go forward directly in a straight line. There were bypaths, turnabouts, slips backward, and the marking of time. But over the long run, there was the march onward and upward. As our president has reminded us, and as we all know very well, we certainly need progress. And we need progress even in the area that we will be discussing, hearing about tonight. Our theme in this fourth annual installation of the concept of progress is from movement to mobilization, keep the momentum. This came about with from conversation among brothers how much we cherish our movements of the past, particularly the civil rights movement. And in our current time, while the movement may look different, there's still a movement that needs to happen. But our movement also needs to evidence itself in mobilization, community organizing. We saw in this past election how important it is to get people to the polls and to get people involved and registered to vote. We cherish our movements, and yet we allow the movement to morph into moments of needed mobilization. The concept of progress represents the ideals of our fraternity in that we are always looking to advance. We're always looking to make progress. We're always looking to do better. We advocate for education and other opportunities, not only for our people, but for others. Our first concept of progress speaker, Brother Reverend Rasan Hall, spoke to us powerfully about 4 years ago when he reminded us progress is not always linear. Sometimes it takes the turns, like we just read in the chapter of our history book. Progress is difficult. Progress sometimes is achieved politically and sometimes it's not. But no matter what the situation, progress always has to happen with organization, motivation, mobilization, and the like. Well, our speaker this evening is one who certainly can speak to all of that. A dear friend of mine, a dear brother beloved of our fraternity, a brother of our brother chapter over in Boston, Epsilon Gamma Lambda, and I will briefly introduce him at this time. Brother Reverend Art J. Gordon is currently a second year Doctor of Ministry student at Boston University School of Theology, where he is studying transformational leadership. And certainly that's very, very fitting. That's something that Brother Gordon knows very well about. He is a fourth generation pastor and preacher, born and raised in Warner Robins, Georgia, a graduate of Savannah State University, cum laude, with a degree in history. We met when he came to Boston, where he pursued his Master of Divinity degree at Boston University School of Theology. He received the Mary McLeod Bethune Scholarship, the Kenosian Scholarship, and the Ralph Shunk Prize. And while a student at the School of Theology, he really, really did organizing work. He was the vice president of the Student Association, a worship intern at Marsh Chapel, and received the Donald A. Well Prize for preaching from the Massachusetts Bible Society. He also took courses at Harvard and was inducted into the Student Honor Society upon graduation. Since 2017, he has been the pastor of the St. John Missionary Baptist Church in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston. Perhaps more near and dear to our heart, in the fall of 2011, Brother Gordon was initiated into our dear Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated through the Delta Eta chapter at Savannah State University. And he has been a member of the Epsilon Gamma Lambda chapter, the Boston Alphas, since 2015. He has received Brother of the Year awards and the Brother Royal Bowling Community Service Award as well. And he was distinguished during that chapter's 75th anniversary as the most, or he was honored rather, as the most distinguished young brother. He is a New Leaders Council fellow in Boston, a seminarian fellow at Auschwitz for the study of professional ethics. He's got a public life fellowship from the Center of Christianity and Public Life. He is so active, and he is involved particularly in the political sphere here in Massachusetts in the work that we're talking about, community engagement and mobilization. I can go on and on about this brother who is not only a fraternity brother, but a dear friend. And we at TIL are just so excited to welcome him, and I hope that you will receive him. Let us hear from our own brother, Reverend Art J. Gordon, our speaker for the concept of progress this evening. Brother Gordon, welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you, Brother Marcus McCullough, Reverend, for that gracious introduction. Brother McCullough has been somebody I go all the way back with from my time first coming to Boston. And he has been so helpful to me and in so many ways that I don't have enough time to talk about it. But I'm very grateful for the invitation to Chapter President Brother Lightfoot, and to the brothers of Theta, Iota, Lambda. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. As most of you already know, I'm a member of Epsilon Gamma Lambda chapter over in Boston, and we have a great deal of respect and love for our brothers over in Western Massachusetts, and so grateful for the work that you all do, day in and day out, week in and week out, year in and year out. If I'm honest, I've been shaking in my boots all day long because I know I was going to talk to you guys, how distinguished you guys are. And I know McCullough read my bio, but I usually, when I hear my bio, I'm usually like, okay, what? Grateful to have done all the things that I've been able to do. It's good to see another good friend, Brother David Halbert, as well, who I go back with several years here in Boston, who has been also another brother who's been very, very helpful to me. So I don't have a lot of slides. Most of my information you probably already know, but I think it's good as we think about the concept of progress to go through it anyway. So let me see if I can do the share screen. I haven't done. Okay, it says sharing is not turned on. Okay, I just sent the request. So who's ever the host, and I went on that to be approved, and let's see if I can try again. Okay, here we go. I think we got it. Let me see if I can pull this up. Let's see. All right. Can everybody see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So conversation tonight is about from movement to mobilization. And there's a lot I want to talk about. And because I'm a preacher, I have a tendency to jump on all kinds of topics and move all around. So, Brother McCullough, if I do the preacher stuff and I get too far off, just bring me right back, okay? And we'll be right there. Mobilization is always important because we're thinking about not only just today for this conversation, but we're thinking about progress for our communities, progress for Black and Brown people, progress for Springfield, progress for Chicopee, progress for Boston, progress for Roxbury, progress for Chelsea and Revere. And like most of you, that's why I signed up to be a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, because I wanted to be a part of the main organization, in my opinion, that was all about progress. Founded in 1906 on an Ivy League campus, young brothers knew that they knew they had a big mission, and that the mission was bigger than them as individuals. And that's how I feel about mobilization and progress today. I want to start off. I really want to start by just saying, if there's ever a time we really need progress, it is actually right now. Most of you already know we just got through November the 5th, which actually happened to be my birthday too. And as our chapter president just mentioned, those results might not have been the results we wanted, but that's where we are. And it reminds us that there is a work ahead for all Alpha brothers in terms of progress, mobilization, and uplifting our communities. But we're not in unfamiliar territory because not only have our founders been through this before, but the preceding generations after them, all the way up into the civil rights movement, realized that they had a really big fight ahead. Obviously, see in this picture is Brother King, who understood that that even the movement would outlive him, that he had a major role to play in mobilization, in inspiration, in motivating, in encouraging, in challenging systems. And he realized that as an Alpha brother, he had a critical role to play, that all Alpha brothers had a real role to play. And that's where we are today. All right. So let's start off with the obvious. November the 5th, 2024. Like most of you, again, as I mentioned, that was my birthday. And I was so excited because I just believed that we was going to have a member of the Divine Nine that was going to be in the Oval Office. And that's not how things turned out. We learned quickly that November the 5th and November the 6th are examples of what happens when communities aren't fully mobilized. It reminds us this is what happens when people aren't registered, when in important states and important cities like Detroit and Philadelphia and Cleveland, Ohio, where a lot of Black and brown people have been disenfranchised, have been marginalized, have been forgotten about. When those folks aren't registered, when those folks aren't mobilized, and even when they aren't encouraged, that this is the type of election results we get. You can make a lot of arguments about what happened that night, but I also think at the same time, when elections come around, there can be a sense of apathy and, well, my vote won't count, and well, I don't know which side is good for me. I can tell you one thing. I know neither side is perfect, but there's definitely one side that would have been much better for others in terms of helping to uplift many of our communities of color out of poverty and out of other socioeconomic situations. So now we know that we have a new president who will be inaugurated next month. We know who the vice president is going to be. If you've been paying attention to the news, you've seen who's going to be on the different secretariats. You think about Secretary of Education, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Labor, Health and Human Services. A lot of these folks have already been nominated. Yes, they've got to be approved by the Senate, but these are folks who the next president has already recommended be secretaries. And that means a lot for us from a public policy perspective. It means that a lot is going to change on the policy perspective. Most of us remember hearing about Project 2025 earlier this summer and even around this spring. And we should not be surprised if that is enacted as well. The presidential election, although it's the biggest election in our country, there are so many other elections that are just as important. I want to just start with the levels of government. I'm sure that all alpha men and all the alpha men on this call, as distinguished and as articulate and as scholarly as you are, you already understand all the levels of government. I just simply want to go over it. So on the federal level, obviously we have Congress. We already know about the president. We already know about the White House. But we also have Congress. And with Congress, we have both our United States senators as well as our United States members of the House of Representatives. We know on the state level, that's the governor, that's the lieutenant governor. And that's our state legislature, which means our state senators and our state reps. As we go down each level, you're really getting closer and closer to those who represent you, but represent you in a way that you'll feel the most. And obviously on the local level, you've got the counties, the towns, and the cities. Here where I live, Suffolk County, got Boston, but there are also other towns that have their own levels of government or their own ways of doing government as well. I'm bringing this up because although most of us may not have loved or appreciated who won on the night of November the 5th, we also got to realize that that there are other levels of government. And that as I mentioned, as each level goes down, these levels, they touch you more and more. You probably will never see the president and vice president. Maybe you have. And if you do, you often try to get a picture with them. But you often see your state representative, your state senator. You might live right next door to your city councilor, town meeting member, or even a school committee member. These are folks who have a level of power on how public policy affects us really, really closely on the local level. The schools that our children go to, the stores that we shop at, the homes that we buy within our own counties, for example. Whatever policies they have, it really hits us and it touches us so much more closely. And so it's important to, as we think about mobilization and progress, yes, we want to keep our eye on who's going to be in the White House, but you really want to know who's going to be your city councilor. You really need to know who's going to be your mayor, you really need to know who's going to represent you at the State House. I work currently for Governor Maura Healey, so I'm in the State House each and every day, and I see the state reps. I saw, I believe Rep Gonzalez out of Springfield, saw him today walking around the State House. You see these people so often, and you know that the work that they're doing is going to affect you so much more closely. So when we think about mobilization, we also have to remember that when it comes to voting, we have to vote all the way down the ballot, not just at the top, not just in the middle. We have to vote the entire ballot. And in the slides I have next, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in terms of mobilization. This is one of my favorite buildings right here. I went here way back when I was in college as an intern, as a United States Senate intern, and I've loved that place ever since because I know so much change and so much power happens in this building. Again, most of this information we already know, but I'm just stating just for conversation's sake. In Congress, which is on the federal level, United States Senate, those senators serve a 6-year term. And if they're reelected, they serve another 6-year term. Same with the United States House of Representatives. I worked for a member of Congress previously, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who just got reelected again, by the way. These are folks that affect public policy on the federal level. So when we think about immigration, when we think about affordable housing from a federal level, when we think about things like the legalization of cannabis federally, these are the people who affect those laws so much more. Because they're on such a larger level and represent more people, obviously they get more media time, they get more press time, etc. My argument is they're just as important as your city councilor, but these are people you should always know who they are. I definitely think all alpha men should know who they are, who represents us, and that alpha chapters around the country should make sure that the folks on the federal level do either town halls or some sessions led by alpha men. I'm biased towards alpha men because I think we're the best, but I think we have to take the lead in that as men of Alpha Phi Alpha. And when it comes to these levels of government, making sure we have the right folks in the right seat, as you can see on this photo, we have somebody who I look up to, Brother Reverend Dr. and Senator Raphael Warnock in my home state of Georgia, who went to Morehouse College, just like Brother Marcus McCullough did. So there's a lot of connections there. And one of the things he quotes that I actually truly believe is that a vote is a kind of prayer for the world we desire for ourselves and for our children. That when we go to vote for president, for state senator, for governor, for city council, for school committee member, that we're voting for someone who has a platform. And we're looking to vote for someone who has a platform that is about progress, that is about creativity, that is about equity and justice and inclusion. So when we vote, we're not just voting to cross a name off. We're voting for, we're in the words of Brother Warnock, we are voting for, our vote is a type of prayer, for the world that we want to see. I'm a firm believer, as a Christian pastor, that nobody is perfect, and no system is perfect. But nonetheless, these are the systems we live in, and these are the people we deal with, and we've got to vote for who we feel can best serve our community and best serve our people and best serve our neighborhoods. So that's why voting is so important. Men of Alpha, we already know why voting is important, because voteless people is a hopeless people. For people who don't get an opportunity to vote, there is no hope. This is a national program we started way back in the 1930s, I believe, 1920s, 1930s, at a time coming out of the Great Depression where a lot of Black people, particularly those in the South, were not registered to vote. Were even trying to get registered to vote, could get you killed. You could lose your job. But alpha men understood, even way back then, that if we're ever going to have progress for our communities, progress for our people, if we're ever going to be taken seriously as a people, that we've got to be people that vote. So I know everyone who's on this call you vote. I know you participated in voting, and that you'll continue to vote. And we've got, as alpha men, as fathers, as educators, as pastors, as business owners, as community leaders, we've got to do all we can to make sure that people continue to get registered to vote, but also that people turn out to vote. That's what mobilization is all about. Progress is not always easy. Progress requires hard work. It requires dedication. And some seasons you might lose. Some seasons you win. Some seasons you compromise a bit, not compromising your values, but sometimes you have to compromise in order to make progress sometimes. Alpha men have always been behind progress. And if we're going to continue to progress, given the dynamics of our political world today, we've got to mobilize, encourage, and inspire people to vote. There's a plethora of reasons why people aren't voting. People aren't voting in large numbers. We have a responsibility, and that is to do all we can to make sure people are registered and that people turn out to vote. One of the things I think is really important in terms of progress, mobilizing, keeping the energy going, is that we need to engage new participants to the political process. Often we see the same candidates year in and year out. U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, governor, state senator, city council. You can call the roll. We know of folks who've been in office 30, 40 years. And it's hard to really argue when you've been in office that long and not a lot of change has happened under you. We got to be able to engage new participants. I think that means more alpha men should run for office on different levels. If you were to ask me, I think every city ought to have an alpha man on the city council or the school committee and in the state legislature. That's just my personal opinion. Sorry to throw my personal opinion out. I think our community would be so much better. But we gotta find ways to engage new participants. One way we can really encourage that mobilization is when people start to see folks that look like them running for office. When young Black girls and young Black women in particular can see other young Black women running, that's a sign or a place of motivation. When you can see, when you've, let's say, formerly been incarcerated, and you see a brother or sister who's formerly incarcerated running for local office, that inspires people to vote. When we see Black men, and when we see fathers, when we see single mothers or single fathers, when we see pastors, when we see business owners stepping out there to run, that helps with our mobilization. Often the standard politician is a white male who used to be a lawyer or who kind of worked his way up the ladder. And, you know, I'm not knocking against that. The point I'm trying to make is we want to see new folks in the electoral process. We want to see new names with new ideas, new energy, new sense of creativity, people that will meet the moment. In the state of Delaware, in Congress, they voted in their first transgender woman. And she raised a lot of money. She got a lot of votes because she represented something that was new. That folks who formerly would sit out said, you know what, I've got to get up and I've got to vote for this person. Reverend Raphael Warnock, something new in Georgia, a pastor who pastors the Ebenezer Baptist Church, the Church of Dr. King, who doesn't have a law degree, but has a PhD in philosophy and has studied theology and sits with people year in and year out, day in and day out. That represented something that was new. So one way we can help mobilization is encourage and engage new participants in the political process. Alpha men have to be a part of that process of whether we look within ourselves, within our own local chapter, within our own brotherhood, or we look within the Divine Nine, some of the other organizations. or we look within other Black organizations or young persons or recent college graduates. You know, one of the things I would love to see, I have no problem with a senior, let's say somebody 70 years old running for elected office. I think that's the beauty of our democracy. I think what I don't like to see is a person who's running at the age of 70 who's already been in office for 30 or 40 years. I'd love to see somebody at 70 run for the first time, because that's a part of the participatory process of democracy, of new voices, new people with new experiences, new background. I'd love to see people in Congress who have student debt, who don't own a home, who rent, who don't own a car. I would love to see people in Congress on the state level and et cetera, who knows what it's like to use food stamps, who knows what it's like to be homeless, who knows what it's like to have had surgery. You know, we can call the roll on this, but alpha men, specifically speaking, and community leaders in general should encourage and seek out new candidates to run for office. You know, civic engagement is, as I already mentioned, is a participation thing. If it's going to change, you got to be involved. You know, there are so many people today that write op-eds and critique who's in office and who did what and who didn't do what. But you're not a part of the process. You don't even vote. You don't even engage. I'm a little biased right now as a pastor, but you know, people love to critique you, but they don't even go to your church. They talk about what you don't do in the community. And my argument is, if you come to my church, you'll find out what we do in the community. It's the same thing with politics and civic engagement. You've got to get involved. Our involvement, yes, these historic Black organizations, the Divine Nine, our Masonic organizations, the Links, the NAACP, the Urban League have always been a part of civic engagement. My argument for tonight is we still have to do a little bit more. Yes, the leaders of these organizations are going to get out and vote, but how can these organizations and its leaders encourage, inspire, and motivate others, particularly young people, disabled people, queer people, poor people, sometimes even rich people, to get out to vote? College-educated people. Another area of group that is often not tapped into is college students, mainly because they're living whatever city because they're in college. But while they're in college, whoever represents them is also affecting public policy that affects them even as a college student. So we've got to know that civic engagement is participatory and that we have to be engaged. And every year, we know it's coming every year. We know the United States Senate is coming every 6 years. Gubernatorial election is every 4 years. U.S. House of Representatives every 2 years. We have to be prepared each time the election season comes up, to be ready to inspire, encourage, and motivate others to get out and vote. And in order to do that, we've got to organize voting drives. Look, we've done this before as alpha men, and I'm going to speak hypothetically. You know, every year we get, what, 50 people, 50 to 100 people registered to vote. The next year we ought to be looking to get 100 to 150. Okay, one year we did a voter registration drive at one church. Next year we ought to look at 2 churches on 2 different weekends. One year we went downtown. The next year we ought to go in the hood too. We ought to walk in the barbershops, in the nail and hair salons. We ought to walk in those barbecue joints, those small businesses. We ought to go to some of those Pop Warner football games that our sons and grandsons play in, and make sure coach is registered. Make sure the people who show up are registered. We ought to go to the UMass and Boston College football game and stand outside and make sure folks get registered to vote. So we've got to organize voting drives. We got to organize political forums. This is something I've done in my church, and I'm looking forward to doing more of it. But inviting those candidates to church. Look, they're going to come to church the 2 Sundays before the election. Why not tell them to come earlier and speak to all the folks in the community about what they're going to do about the environment. What are their plans from a public policy perspective about climate change and education and healthcare? And what is your plan to help aid small businesses? Bring them to the church. Bring them to the Boys and Girls Club. Bring them to the YMCA. Bring them to the Grand Lodge, and have them answer directly. Again, I would love for those folks many of those to be alpha men, but even if they're not, whoever they are, that's how we engage and let them know that we're serious not only about our vote, but we're serious about the people we vote and what we want them to turn out and do for us and our communities. And finally, I believe Brother McCullough would agree with me. We've got to engage faith-based organizations. I just spoke about this a little bit when it comes to churches, but not just Christian churches. We're talking about the Jewish community, the Muslim community. We're talking about the Asian religion communities. We're even talking about atheists and agnostic, Quakers. I'm a firm believer that people of faith ought to be engaged in the political process and vice versa. This is a picture from the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization at the Massachusetts State House. I see these folks all the time. They're at the State House. In fact, on this picture, if you look up at the top, you'll see Brother Rasan Hall. These folks are always at the State House. They're advocating for housing, criminal justice reform, because we've got to engage faith-based organizations as well. Our youth, our young people, are members of these faith-based organizations. Our seniors are members and or engage these faith-based organizations. Our brothers, our sisters, our small business owners, our college executives, our college students, many are engaged in different faith-based organizations. We got to find ways to turn them out. So when I'm thinking about progress, I'm thinking about engaging people on every single level and in every single age group as well. Some of this in churches, we have souls to the polls. We make sure that folks in our church, particularly seniors, get a ride to go vote. We've got to do everything we can. But if folks can't get out and if we can't get folks to ride in, we've got to also make sure that folks can do absentee ballots as well. All of this is important to me and really should be important for us but because of who represents us. And sure, I could go quickly and say, Trump this, Trump that. I'm not going to do that for tonight's conversation. What I want to say is that we have a voice, and our voice is our vote. But we've got to increase that voice. It's just like, and I've used this as a sermon illustration before, it's just like throwing a rock out into a pond. You'll get a ripple of waves. But if two people throw a rock, you'll get more ripple of waves. But if you've got 100 people around a pond throwing a rock, there'll be so many waves in that pond. That's what voting is like. And so when I think about mobilization, movement, progress, I think about us being intentional about engaging the political process and civic engagement and organizing as well. Organizing happens within our organizations, within our churches, within our schools. We got to teach civic engagement as well. And there's so much more we can do. And I look forward to having more of this conversation with you all tonight. Thank you.
Wow. Phenomenal, Brother Gordon. Of course, it's just such a wonderful, wonderful thing to hear you speak. In a moment, we'll open up for just a few minutes for some of the brothers that are with us who may have questions they want to answer. But if you don't mind, brothers, I would just like to go ahead and ask the first one, something that's been on my mind. Like yourself, I tend to be a little bit of an expert in alliteration, right? So we've got mobilization or movement to mobilization and keeping the momentum, right? All these M words. There's another M word that has been on my mind, and you kind of touched on it, and I would invite you to say more about it. Motivation. motivation. It feels a lot of times as though we can't get the mobilization because we're just not motivated. And maybe it's like you said, we feel like we don't have any skin in the game, or I don't know. Just you're with out of your wealth of experience and knowledge. Can you say something about motivation and the role that that plays in this whole project?
Yeah, motivation is so important because, again, going back to some of the stuff I mentioned earlier, when you see in the same type of person over and over again, you can lose motivation. When you see people like Donald Trump get reelected after all of the stuff that came with it, you can lose motivation. Um, when student debt is still a problem and housing prices are still going high and small businesses can't barely survive, and everybody who's ran for office and won said they was going to do something about it and nothing has been done, it's really hard to keep that motivation. I still think the best way to motivate, first and foremost, is to have new candidates with new ideas and new energy who look different. I like Alpha Man. I love wearing a suit and tie, but maybe it might be cool to see a candidate who wears J's and khakis and a button down. Just using that as an example. Um, uh, Seeing new candidates. Um, seeing people who are really seeing people who really not only are new candidates but identify with your own lived experience. You know, Again, I hate to keep bringing up his name. The president was already a millionaire 40 years ago. I'd love to see candidates who spent years on food stamps. I'd love to see candidates who been evicted before and know what that feels like. Candidates who dropped out of college because they had an ailing parent or because they had a child. When you see that, it does give a little bit more motivation. And I think thirdly, also motivation comes when you can see people who look like you meet you where you are and let you know why it's important to vote. As a pastor, as a community leader, and as a political, I see people all the time I talk to who say, I'm not doing all the political stuff. Sometimes you got to motivate them by letting them know, hey, if you don't vote in this election, the housing price is going to go even higher. If you don't vote in this election, where you live, that neighborhood might be gone in a few years. Those are also other ways of motivating. Here's what I'll leave with, Brother McCullough. Other communities are motivated to vote because they've got business interests, they've got real estate interests, they've got healthcare executive interests, they've got private school interests. They get out and vote. My argument is we ought to be motivated even more because of that fact. Because if we're ever going to uplift ourselves, it is going to start with the vote.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I hear you kind of saying that, like, we need to know what's on the line. We need to understand what's at risk. And that's an important conversation that I think we as alphas can have, and so many others. Brother President Lightfoot has a question, and then Brother Halbert as well. Go ahead, brothers.
All right, thank you, Brother Gordon. Thanks for sharing your comments and perspective. I was over here taking notes. As I said, I think we have a playbook for, our Vote as People is a Hopeless People program that you shared. So I appreciate that. My question, I've been in the education field, find that same challenge of getting new participants, if you will, to, enter into education. And so I know you shared some strategies, but want to know if you had others, other comments or ideas on how we get more representation from those who we have interest in to step up into those positions. Given that one may not feel they are qualified or have the skill set, and you mentioned the various levels of representation that you would like to see. How do we get, individuals prepared for those positions or even engaged to even seek opportunities like that?
Yeah. First, you got to go talk to them and tell them why it's important. Again, I hate to keep bringing up my whole preacher background, But before I became a preacher,
It's all
people
right. Bring it in. We
surprisingly
love
came up to me and said, "Hey, I think you'd be a great preacher. Hey, I think you'd be great at politics." And I didn't see it at first, but I took the step. So I think one of the things we've got to do, Brother President Lightfoot, is find ways to keep encouraging people and give them opportunities and ability to lead. When we think about education, you spoke to yourself as an educator. I think about how can we find ways for students to lead. There might be something in their class. It may be with maybe with the sport that they play. It may be giving them responsibility of, I don't know, going to the principal and, I want you to go to the principal and lead and ask the principal for a meeting. Those things can seem very scary, and sometimes they seem small too. But what they really do is really inspire and encourage a lot of people. In fact, I'd also argue that most people who are at least in elected office, somebody encouraged them or inspired them to run. We think about some of the younger folks. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez she went to Boston University, but before she ran, she was a bartender, and somebody can even see that in her. So I think what we've got to do is really start speaking to people, talking to people. For alphas in particular, and I know it's different across the country, but whatever you got alpha bears or alpha gents or alpha esquires, you're already developing the next generation of leaders right there. And you've got to let those young kids know, those teenagers know, those high school students, even those college students know that you can be the next president. You should think that way. You can be the next governor. You should think that way. So I think we've got to go out and talk to people. We've got to, I think another way, sometimes we got to get out there and run. Even if we don't win, we've got to get out there and try so other people can see, okay, Brother Lightfoot did it. I can do it too. If Brother Halbert did it, I can give it a shot too. I'm sure he might have been just as scared, but he went out there and tried it anyway. So I don't know how helpful that answer was. It might seem kind of simple, but that's just what I think. You got to talk to people. You got to encourage them. You got to inspire them. You got to find ways that they can get engaged. I think about this as a pastor. When you're in church, you have a youth ministry, but you're trying to find how can I get these youth to feel like they're leading? You know what? I'll have one read a scripture on Sunday. And you know what? I'll have one advise me on where the youth should go for a summer outing. Those small things I think are really building to build up the leadership potential and qualities and all of our people, but particularly our young people as well. And just to add, I know seniors that I speak to as a pastor, as a community leader, as a director of community engagement for the governor. Seniors, they have all these lists of things. We need this, we need this, we need that. I know you're 66, but you might want to consider running for city council because you speak to a great contingency of people that are going through the same thing you're going through. And who better to make change for our communities than the folks who are actually living through it?
That's excellent. I think that's a great point too. I was thinking as you were speaking, Brother Gordon, Brother Reverend Dr. King didn't want to lead the movement.
That's correct.
Someone encouraged him. Someone said, "Hey,
him.
you would be great for this." So that's a really, really huge point that we all need to write down. Brother Halbert,
and even in leading it, he didn't think he was going to be leading it that long. But
right, it was a temporary. It was a temporary thing, but you don't know how long the work takes, right?
Right.
You don't know.
Right.
Brother Halbert.
Thank you so much, Brother Gordon. Always good to see you. Thank you so much for everything that you contributed this evening. Always appreciate it. So my question for you is, a lot of our conversation this evening has been focusing on getting us almost to election day, right? And through having the right people, as you said, that representation component is absolutely critical. And representation, not tokenism. I think that's also another critical point that we want to lift up. But my question is, on the other side of election day, right? The stone rolls away and a new day dawns. And so the question becomes, how do we keep people motivated, to your point, beyond election day? Let them understand and know that it's not enough just to go and cast your ballot at the ballot box, but that you have to keep after it. You have to keep making those calls. You have to stay engaged. You have to stay connected not just to the elected officials, but to the work that you sent those elected officials hopefully to do in whatever office it is, like you said, from the federal all the way down to the municipal government, and it's really touching the people on a day-to-day basis. So what can we do as alpha men, in your opinion, to make sure that we're continuing to advance that message and that we're continuing to uplift and support our community and making sure that they know that their role doesn't stop on election day?
Yeah, great question, Brother Halbert. One of the moments when people kind of dip in their political participation is right after election, because either the person you really wanted won and you feel relieved, or the person you didn't want to win won and you feel sad and you feel down. You know, as I'm thinking about this conversation, my recommendation is, well, let me go back just a little bit. I think this is what our founders and our brothers before us all went through. I mean, we're talking about alpha men from what, 1906 to what, 1966, 1968. We're talking about at least 60 years of our brotherhood going through a period where they weren't considered human. There were no laws to protect them. I mean, you could go on and on and on. But they stayed engaged in a variety of forms. I remember listening to a documentary about the Brown versus Board of Education and how Brother Thurgood Marshall was the leader of that and how there were other alpha lawyers a part of it. And even they knew after the election of Dwight Eisenhower, we still got to work on this case. This case, Brown v. Board of Education, is going to open so many more doors. So even regardless of who the president is, we've got to work on this case. And they worked day in and day out and had like 15-minute breaks. I think one thing alpha men can do, and I think one thing alpha men can do is after election, make a statement. Show up at the city council meeting. Hey, migration is a big issue in our state. We're concerned about it. We want to put it on the docket for conversation. We want to have community input and community support. We know that in the next month, Donald Trump is going to start deporting people. We want to know, what is the city council doing about it right now? What is the school committee conversation with parents who are undocumented or their children are undocumented? Just using that as an example. I think what we got to do, and sometimes I think this is hard, Brother Halbert, we got to show up. Actually, let me take that back. We're alpha men. It shouldn't be hard. We got to show up first. So once folks are elected and sworn in January, that first Monday, we ought to be showing up. And by showing up, I do mean showing up at city council, showing up at school committee meetings, etc. But I'm also saying somebody ought to be writing an op-ed. You know, somebody ought to be doing an interview. Somebody ought to be, the chapter ought to be, nobody's really ever seen like a political forum in January. That literally just dropped in my mind. We always see those forums for who's running for office and who's in office. We see in what, August and September, maybe July, maybe October. Have we seen one in January, the week after people are sworn in? I think that's where alpha men have to be the leaders. We've been trained. We've been gifted. We're first of all, servants of all. I think that's how we have to start thinking, Brother Halbert, given the circumstances we find ourselves in today on a political level. We already know January 20th, Donald Trump's going to be sworn in. What are we doing on January 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th, January 21st, January 22nd in our respective communities? Springfield, Boston, Worcester, Framingham, Brockton. I think this is a great time for alpha men to be alpha men.
That's excellent. Thank you. That's so real. That's so true. I have not seen any of those forums in the first parts of the year. Brother Arthur Shern, you have a question for Brother Gordon?
Well, I think it's just more of a statement. That is, first of all, thank you very much, Brother Gordon, for being with us this this evening. But my question is more about after I'm still, suffering from the loss and still processing, what actually happened. And in a few cases, I'm seeing in news and on social media what I think is the true reason for the loss. And to me, that's the elephant in the room. And nobody really wants to deal with it up front. They want to talk about the economy. They want to talk about the border. They want to talk about a lot of things. But what I think, the real elephant in the room is that the bottom line is that in this country, there is a lot of racism. And what Donald Trump has successfully did over the last 8 years was to open that can of worms and allow those racist people to speak out. Prior to that, the racist people, they just had to keep their mouth shut. And we were on a better course. I mean, but I just don't think that there's enough attention to the real elephant in the room. And thank you.
Yeah, Brother Sherman, I couldn't agree with you more. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And Brother Hal, racism and misogyny, it was all up front. People talked about people being concerned about their gas prices and the cost of eggs and milk. Yeah, that's important, but let's call a spade a spade. Racism played a role in this. Sexism played a role in this. Unfortunately, I do think again, this is not something that's unfamiliar to men of Alpha Phi Alpha. We were literally founded on the campus where we were excluded from everything. And way back in 1906, that's a long time ago. You think about what Black folks went through at that time. You're talking about like just a generation and a half removed from slavery. So this is not, in terms of the organization, this is not unfamiliar territory. I think what we have to do is keep being alphabet. We got to keep talking about it. We have to keep bringing it up. We've heard political commentators talk about the racism and the sexism that played a role in the U.S. election. And I think we just got to keep talking about it. We have to keep mobilizing. And this goes back to the progress and mobilizing thing I was talking about earlier. We've got to keep telling Black and brown folks, hey, this is why you got to get out and vote. I know you might not agree with everything from a Democrat, for example. But the last thing you want to see is a racist person win. I know you might not be big on a woman being president, but I guarantee you this one could have helped you out more than the other. I think we have to find ways to use that to encourage and motivate people that, look, it's 2024, and we're going through some of the same things that folks went through back in 1964. About 60 years removed, we're going through some of those same things. Yes, racism was the big elephant in the room. In fact, I don't even know if it's an elephant no more. I think everybody just know it, that it's there. That definitely played a role. I think when we can combat that, we got to get more folks of color who represent our values and our morals in elected office. And for me, the political process is not just people who are in office. You think about one of our frat brothers, Reverend William Barber. He's not in elected office, and I don't think he ever wants to be in elected office. But he has so much to say about public policy and change than folks who are actually in office. And I'm not saying all alpha men have to be like William Barber, but we can find ways as educators, as academics, as medical doctors, as pastors, as school teachers, small business owners, to bring these issues to the forefront, hold our elected officials accountable, and let them know that we shall not be moved, and that we will fight. I believe it was our founder, Brother Vernon Woodson Taney, that said, we shall fight till hell freezes over and then fight on the ice. That's what we have to be today.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Brother Johnson has a question, and then we'll start wrapping it up soon. Brother Gordon, if that's all right with you. Brother Ed, Brother Ed Johnson, come on and ask your question.
I'll make it quick because it's really just pulling the thread through. I just want to focus back on Springfield for a minute, since Springfield has an abysmal voter turnout. And you talked about a lot of great initiatives and great action. I just want to get your sense of how can we turn this boat that is so big and takes such a long time just to rev up, even think about being turned in the right direction, with the long tail of history of poor, abysmal voter turnout, especially for the city of Springfield. What do we need to do differently? Your
There's
thoughts
a
on
couple things. First, we need to get the statistics and the data on the specific communities that have lower voter turnout. And we've got to also find out why. Is it because these folks, generally speaking, work at a time that it's hard to get out and vote on election day? Is it because certain election materials aren't dropped in their neighborhoods and only dropped in affluent neighborhoods? Is it because there are people who might have been formerly incarcerated and have lost the ability to vote? Is it because these folks just feel like their voice hadn't been heard in so long? I think the first thing is finding out what that data is and then using that data as leverage to go in and sort of attack. If it's been a lack of lit drops and materials, we want to be able to provide that. If it's been a lack of open spaces for forums to talk about politics, we want to provide that. If politicians don't show up or barely show up, we as alpha men want to go to Bethel A&E and host a forum and invite them to be there. And again, I'm speaking hypothetically. Who are the educators in our chapter? Who in our chapter knows the educators in those communities that can give us more information? What park do our young kids go to in Springfield that I know a lot of parents will show up at, and the chapter can have and I'm speaking hypothetically, we can have hot dogs one day, but also get folks registered to vote. We can hand out popsicles to the kids while they play basketball, but make sure their parents and grandparents get registered to vote. So I think, Brother Johnson, we got to start thinking holistically like that. We got, what is the data? And now what is the data and the statistics? How can we address that? Is it, for example, there's a large amount of people in that community that maybe have a formerly incarcerated past. Let's have a forum on that. Let's invite the mayor or whoever is running for mayor. Let's invite the state senator or who's ever running for state senate. Let's invite the person running for United States Senate who's going all around the country. I'm sure they will want those votes because it could help them out, whoever it is, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. Let's invite them to the table to talk about it as well and ask them what is their plan to address it. Let's bring all the pastors together and let's have a big forum at a church, or let's do a session with pastors talking about what their members experience that live in that particular neighborhood or that community. So we've just really got to just start thinking holistically and really thinking creatively. There's so much we can do, but it does take alpha men, and I'm saying alpha men specifically, to sit down and strategize and organize and mobilize and find ways to be creative in that space.
All right, that is excellent. Thank you, Brother Johnson, for a wonderful question. I really appreciate you bringing it back to Springfield because, you know, that is such an important part. When we're talking about progress, they say charity begins at home. Well, progress begins at home as well. Again, we are so grateful for Brother Gordon and for your words and for your time. And again, if you just happen to be watching this, go to, I think it's springfieldalphas.org, is it .com? I think it's .org, and check out some of the great work that we're doing. And again, please consider, even if you will, making a donation to our Scholarship and Mentorship Foundation. That is one of the ways that we do the kind of work that Brother Gordon is talking about. And we are just so grateful for you brothers here in the Zoom space and for all of you who may be watching us on the outside. Brother Gordon, do you have any kind of closing remarks for us, or certainly Brother President, if you have anything for us as we prepare to wrap up this evening after such a wonderful presentation?
I just want to say thank you again to the brothers of TIL. So grateful to be with you. There's a lot of work to do. You never know. You might see me knocking on your door one day. So just be ready.
Hey, we ready for it, brother. We are absolutely ready. Well, for all of you, thank you on behalf of our president, Brother Lightfoot, and myself, and our social justice chair, Brother Halbert. Again, we thank Brother Art Gordon. We thank all of you. And keep your eyes peeled, because the work of Alpha will continue, the work of progress will continue, and TIL and all Alphas will lead the way. Thank you so much for being with us, and have a wonderful evening. We'll look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye-bye.
The recording has stopped.
All right. Yeah. I guess